For decades, Mali, like so many other African nations, was trapped in an economic straitjacket. You've probably heard it all before: high debt-to-GDP ratios, loans taken out to pay off the interest on previous loans, and foreign lenders dictating terms that siphon wealth right out of Africa's veins. It's a familiar story, isn't it? But here's where Mali flips the script in a way no one saw coming. Imagine this. A nation that was once drowning in financial obligations suddenly throws off the shackles and emerges debt-free. That's exactly what Mali did. But the main question is, how Mali did it. Let's find out. Let's rewind a bit and understand how a country, once regarded as a perpetual debtor, managed to pull off this economic miracle. First, let's set the scene. Mali's debt situation was dire. For years, almost 50% of the national budget was eaten up by debt repayments. Picture this. Hospitals were underfunded, schools couldn't afford basic supplies, roads remained unpaved, and all the while, Mali's hard-earned revenue was funneled overseas to service its debt. It was like being stuck in quicksand. The harder they tried to move, the deeper they sank. For Mali, as with much of Africa, the debt burden was not just a financial issue. It was a question of sovereignty. How can you claim to be truly independent when you're at the mercy of foreign creditors? Enter Colonel Assimi Goïta, the military leader who took over in 2021 amidst a backdrop of political turmoil. Unlike previous leaders who bent over backward to please Western powers and international lenders, Goïta had a different vision. He wasn't interested in playing by the old rules. His administration took a scalpel to the national budget, slashing wasteful spending and putting a stop to dubious contracts that funneled money into the pockets of foreign interests. But this wasn't just about cutting costs. It was about making the country self-reliant. So, what was the secret behind this economic turnaround? Goïta's government focused on maximizing Mali's natural resources. You see, Mali is rich in gold, one of the most sought-after commodities in the world. For years, however, the profits from gold mining went straight into the coffers of foreign companies. It was a tale as old as time. African resources enriching everyone but Africans. But Goïta wasn't having it. His administration renegotiated contracts, ensuring that a bigger slice of the profits stayed within Mali's borders. The result? A surge in national revenue allowed the country to build up reserves quickly. And let's not forget about the agricultural sector. While much of the world focuses on tech and innovation, Mali turned to the basics. The government invested heavily in agriculture, a sector that employs a significant portion of the population. By modernizing farming techniques, providing subsidies to local farmers, and prioritizing food self-sufficiency, Mali not only fed its people, but also created a surplus that could be exported to neighboring countries. This was a game changer. With more revenue coming in and less money flowing out to service debt, Mali found itself in a position to make the historic announcement: a $332 million debt clearance. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just about the numbers on a balance sheet. Mali's debt payoff was a statement of independence, a bold declaration to the rest of the world that they would no longer be shackled by the chains of financial colonialism. This move sent shockwaves across the continent, especially among corrupt African leaders who've been more interested in lining their own pockets than serving their people. Imagine their surprise when Mali, a country they once looked down upon, suddenly stood tall, debt-free, and unburdened. Yet, this was not a flash-in-the-pan moment. It was the result of strategic planning, hard decisions, and a vision that looked beyond short-term gains. The international community was left scratching their heads, wondering how a country that had been on the brink of economic collapse suddenly pulled off such a feat. Was this some kind of miracle? Was Goïta practicing economic wizardry? The truth is much simpler. It was about putting Mali first, focusing on what the country had rather than what it lacked. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Mali's success is not just an isolated case. It has the potential to inspire other African nations that are still trapped in the debt cycle. But will they have the courage to follow Mali's lead? That's the question on everyone's mind. Because let's be honest, it's one thing to talk about breaking free from debt, but it's another thing entirely to do it. But Mali's bold move isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of a broader, seismic shift taking place in the Sahel region. Enter the Sahel Alliance, a coalition of countries, including Burkina Faso and Niger, who are tired of being treated like pawns in a geopolitical chess game. What's happening here is bigger than just one country getting out of debt. It's the beginning of a revolution that could change the future of Africa forever. Let's rewind a bit. For decades, the Sahel region has been seen as nothing more than a backyard for foreign powers, particularly France. French troops, French banks, French corporations, all of them had their claws sunk deep into the region. The justification, security, and economic stability. But ask anyone on the ground, and they'll tell you that these so-called partnerships have done more harm than good. From draining resources to propping up corrupt leaders, foreign influence has kept the Sahel countries trapped in a cycle of dependency. But things started to change when Mali, under the leadership of Colonel Assimi Goïta, decided to take control of its destiny. You might be thinking, okay, so Mali paid off its debt. Big deal. How does that affect anyone else? Well, here's where it gets interesting. Mali's actions have lit a fire under its neighbors. Burkina Faso and Niger quickly took notice and realized that if Mali could break free, so could they. This realization gave birth to the Sahel Alliance, a coalition that's not just about military cooperation or economic deals, but about reclaiming sovereignty. These countries are saying, enough is enough. They're tired of the old colonial powers calling the shots and draining their resources under the guise of aid and development. The Sahel Alliance isn't just a diplomatic club. It's a statement of defiance, a declaration that these nations are ready to stand on their own 2 feet. Now, let's talk about France's reaction. Unsurprisingly, the French aren't exactly thrilled about this new development. For years, they've maintained a stronghold in the Sahel, justifying their presence with phrases like anti-terrorism efforts and stabilizing the region. But ask yourself this: if their presence was so beneficial, why are countries like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso pushing them out? The truth is that the French influence in the region has often been more about protecting their interests than genuinely helping the local populations. But this isn't just about kicking out the French. The Sahel Alliance is looking eastward for new partnerships. And guess who's stepping in to fill the void? That's right, Russia and China. These countries are bringing in investments, infrastructure projects, and military support, all without the strings that come attached to Western aid. Now, this is where things get interesting because you might be thinking, is the Sahel Alliance just swapping one set of masters for another? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Let's break that down. Unlike Western aid, which often comes with conditions that force countries into economic subservience, Russia and China are playing a different game. They're not interested in dictating how these countries should run their governments. Instead, they're offering investments with fewer strings attached, focusing on mutual benefits. Mali has already secured deals with Russian firms for resource extraction and infrastructure projects, and China is more than happy to step in with its Belt and Road Initiative. But here's where the plot thickens. This pivot away from the West is not just about economics, it's about power. By forging ties with non-Western powers, the Sahel countries are trying to create a multipolar world where they have options beyond the usual suspects like the IMF and World Bank. The Sahel Alliance is leveraging its resources, gold, uranium, and agricultural potential, not as commodities to be exploited by foreign powers, but as bargaining chips to secure better deals. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't going to be a walk in the park. The Sahel Alliance is taking a massive gamble here. By turning away from traditional partners like France and the US, they risk economic isolation if things go south. But the leaders of the Sahel Alliance, particularly Mali's Goïta and Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré, are betting big on the idea that they can build self-sustaining economies without the need for foreign handouts. And it's already starting to show results. Burkina Faso, for example, is following Mali's lead by nationalizing key industries and creating its own treasury bank. This isn't just about rejecting Western influence. It's about building a new economic model where the profits stay within the country instead of being funneled abroad. Niger, which is rich in uranium, is renegotiating deals with foreign mining companies to ensure that more of the profits go toward developing local infrastructure. But let's be real. Not everyone is happy about this. Critics, especially in the West, are already painting this as a dangerous move that could destabilize the region. They argue that by partnering with Russia and China, the Sahel countries are just trading one form of dependency for another. But here's the question we should be asking. Is it better to be beholden to Western powers who dictate your every move, or to engage with new partners who are at least willing to respect your sovereignty? The Sahel Alliance is banking on the latter, and if they succeed, this could be the beginning of a new era for Africa, one where nations negotiate as equals rather than beggars. Imagine a future where African countries can leverage their natural resources, negotiate trade deals on their own terms, and build economies that are resilient, independent, and self-sustaining. That's the dream. And for the first time in a long time, it feels like it could actually happen. But the road ahead is filled with challenges. The Sahel Alliance will have to navigate a minefield of geopolitical pressures, economic pitfalls, and internal divisions. The question is, can they stay united long enough to see this vision through? So far, it looks like the leaders will make the unity happen, and nothing can stop a leader whose only aim is to serve. Now the question is, where are these actions taking Africa? Imagine this for a moment. Africa, a continent once labeled as the world's beggar, starts to flip the script. Picture a scenario where countries across the continent are no longer kneeling before the IMF or the World Bank, pleading for loans that come with suffocating conditions. Instead, they're negotiating trade deals from a position of strength, dictating their own terms. What happens if Africa keeps changing like this? What happens if the momentum sparked by Mali spreads like wildfire? Let's not mince words here. If Africa continues down this path of economic self-determination, we could be on the brink of witnessing a continental revolution unlike anything seen before. Gone would be the days where African nations are exploited for their natural resources while their people live in poverty. Instead, we'd see an era where Africa reclaims its wealth, reinvests it locally, and finally takes its place as a global powerhouse. Let's explore what this means in practical terms. First up, the end of the debt trap. For decades, African countries have been stuck in a vicious cycle of borrowing to pay off old loans, only to find themselves even deeper in debt. This debt isn't just financial, it's a tool of control, a leash that keeps countries in line. But if more nations follow Mali's example and clear their debts, they won't just be freeing up their budgets, they'll be freeing themselves from the political strings attached to those loans. Imagine a continent where national budgets are used for development, not for lining the pockets of foreign banks. Imagine what that would do for job creation and economic growth. Right now, Africa's youth unemployment rates are some of the highest in the world. But if countries invest in industries that add value, manufacturing, tech, agriculture, suddenly you're looking at millions of jobs being created. Young Africans would no longer have to risk their lives crossing the Mediterranean in search of a better future. They could build that future right at home. But it's not just about economics. The ripple effects of this change would go far beyond money. If Africa keeps moving in this direction, we could see a shift in global geopolitics. Think about it. If Africa becomes economically self-reliant, it won't have to bow to Western powers anymore. The days of African leaders being summoned to European capitals to beg for aid could become a relic of the past. Instead, we'd see African leaders sitting at the global table as equals, negotiating trade deals, security arrangements, and climate agreements on their own terms. Now, you might be wondering, is this just a pipe dream? Are we getting ahead of ourselves? Maybe. But let's be real. Change is already happening, and it's happening fast. Just look at what's been accomplished in the last few years. Mali cleared its debt, Burkina Faso is nationalizing its banks, and the Sahel Alliance is pushing back against foreign influence. These aren't isolated incidents, they're signs of a larger movement that's gaining momentum. But let's not pretend this will be a smooth ride. There are powerful forces that would rather see Africa stay exactly where it is. If African nations keep moving toward independence, we can expect a backlash from the usual suspects. We're talking about economic sanctions, political destabilization efforts, and even attempts at regime change. The West isn't just going to sit back and watch as Africa rewrites the rules of the game. There will be pushback, and it could get ugly. So, what does Africa need to do to keep this momentum going? First, it needs strong visionary leadership. Leaders like Assimi Goïta in Mali and Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso are showing what's possible when you put national interests first. But they're just the beginning. For this movement to succeed, other African leaders need to step up, make bold decisions, and, most importantly, stay united. The Sahel Alliance is a great start, but imagine if that model expanded across the continent. Second, Africa needs to invest in its people. Education, healthcare, and infrastructure aren't luxuries. They're the foundation of a strong, self-sustaining economy. By focusing on these areas, African nations can ensure that the benefits of economic independence reach everyone, not just a select few. And let's not forget about technology. The digital revolution has the potential to leapfrog Africa into a new era, much like mobile banking did in the early 2000s. Finally, let's talk about the cultural shift. For too long, Africa has been viewed as a continent that needs saving, a place that can't succeed without outside help. But what if that narrative changed? What if African nations started to see themselves not as dependents but as equals on the global stage? This change in mindset could be the most powerful shift of all. Imagine the impact on the next generation of African leaders, entrepreneurs, and innovators if they grew up believing that they can change the world. So what happens if Africa keeps changing like this? The answer is simple. Everything changes. The balance of power shifts. The global economic order is disrupted. And, most importantly, the people of Africa finally get the chance to build the future they deserve. The world is watching, and Africa's story is far from over. The choices made in the coming years will determine whether this is a fleeting moment of hope or the beginning of a new era of African independence. So, what do you think? Can Africa truly break free from the chains of debt, dependency, and exploitation? Or is the dream of a self-sufficient continent just that? A dream? Let us know in the comments section. Do you think anything can stop passionate leaders? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about. The Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.